Welcome back, guys. Today we've got episode 2 of Perfect Score, our little Z League, I don't know if you want to call it a podcast or just review series, where Nick and myself just kind of go over some of the core strategies to trying to put together better decks. We've seen a lot of decks played over the last few years, and uh, anyone that knows the league knows Nick's got plenty to say about the way you should build decks. So it just felt like a pretty good time to. Uh, Build up a series to dig a little deeper into that. In the first episode, we talked about um, just like core staples for decks, things that should kind of go into everything. Your Power Seven was our opening slide there, and uh, just your sort of average deck is going to play these cards, and we just sort of went over what we felt was right. In the comments for that video, we had a couple comments that were, referring to, this is cool, but, do you think there's room to talk about things like Frieza's Force Bubble or Goku's Running Defense or things like that? And some of these are, in a lot of decks, and there's some reasons why we didn't get into including like these particular cards, but we wanted to take a quick second to reflect back on that and uh, just sort of cover like why we might not have brought those up. So Nick, do you have what do you think? Why didn't you have anything to say about these?
So Frieza's Force Bubble, I think, is a card that's going to see some play in various decks here and there. I think this card is more like it's a good card, but it's not a card that you play all the time. I think if you're a hybrid deck or an energy deck, you're not going to play this. And I think that if you're a purely physical deck who is actually good at physically beating down, you don't need another energy stop ball. So I actually don't think Frieza's Force Bubble fits in a lot of decks. I don't think it's a card I want to play that often. I think it's more of a control shell kind of card. And then like Goku's Running Defense, I think is actively not a good card. Um, this is not a card I play in basically any deck unless I am on exactly Goku Freestyle. I'm not going to play this card. Stopping only focused energy attack or on non-focused energy attacks is not great. Being a combat card is not great. Like there's just nothing about this card excites me. So unless I am specifically Goku Freestyle, I'm not going to play this card ever. So these are the main two that people were asking questions about. That's kind of my take on them. I think that Goku's Running Defense is actively bad, and Force Bubble is a control card. I play Force Bubble in most of the same decks I play things like Startled. So, not super often.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the same boat I'm in. For me, Frieza's Force Bubble, you mentioned it kind of in the middle of your thing where a good like energy stop all in your physical decks is that you're just punching them to zero. So if you have a good physical deck that's just doing physical damage, you're already stopping energy attacks from even happening. So like double, triple loading on the energy stop alls doesn't feel great to me. Um, I think, like Nick said, there are times where Frieza's Force Bubble is good, and if I'm playing like a ball deck or something, and I want to additionally maximize on times I can't get my balls captured, I'll play this kind of card. Goku's Running Defense. I think this card has gotten worse. I think this card did probably used to be pretty close to not necessarily staple, but like pretty playable. Having one more energy stop all. I know you can't stop focused, but like one more energy stop all is pretty good. But as anyone that's like familiar with kind of the like NZ meta space, will notice if they're paying attention that like energy attacks there are more of them, yes, but there's a lot of like focused attacks and stuff going around too. So omni blocks and things that can't stop energy attacks are just sort of at their like all-time lowest value. So I think a card like this that is the worst of the energy stop alls and is now even less good than it used to be doesn't make the cut for me very often either. You have a good point, Nick, of having it in Goku Freestyle. That obviously makes sense as one more fetchable stop all off of Mastery or whatever. But overall, I don't think this would be a card I would put in that I would at least call as like a every deck should have these two cards in it. I don't think either one of these is on that list for me. So, moving on to this week's episode. Um, in this week's episode, we're going to dig deeper into Sensei decks and what you should what you should have in your Sensei deck, but also which Senseis you should use and why and when. Um, it's not always just like slap North Kai on your deck and like call it good. Sometimes that's not the right answer, and we want to just kind of talk about the times that that is. Nick, I'll let you get started with this first one here.
Okay, so Winston Sensei is for you. So to me, there's two that are like blatantly obvious choices, right? South Kai and Piccolo Sensei. I'll start with Piccolo first because I think it's really basic and simple. I play Piccolo Sensei if I'm playing 50 card Dragon Ball decks. That is the only time I play Piccolo Sensei, and I basically always play Piccolo Sensei in those decks. Those decks are kind of class canony, and you don't have the ability to play a whole lot of answers, so you end up having to main deck your answers. And there's a lot of matchups where, a card like Frieza's Deception, which we'll talk more about later, is great to have access to, but you don't want it in specific matchups. So Piccolo Sensei allows that Dragon Ball deck to kind of expand its role a little bit and just pick out the cards that are bad in each certain matchup. So Piccolo Sensei to me, like it does a cute thing and it can be fun to play, but to me, if you're playing a full 85 card deck, even if it's a ball deck, this is not a Sensei I want to play. South Kai is kind of in the same boat where it's like, to me, it's pretty clear when you want South Kai. If your deck revolves around playing specifically one ally, if you are Future Gohan who needs Future Trunks, if you are uh, there's a couple of small ones like that. There's Android 15 who wants to play Android 14. Anything that's real specific and generic, or you'll see this a lot of times with Bojack because Bojack's allies are incredibly good, and it doesn't matter what your power stages are to use them. So that's kind of when you play South Kai. I think South Kai is also pretty clean in that, like, if you're playing Turles, you want South Kai Sensei, right? If you're playing Future Gohan, you want South Kai Sensei. So, like, to me, it's obvious when you need to play these guys. I don't think that's something you'll struggle with. One thing I did want to add on to South Kai that I myself am guilty of not doing and has punished me, before and would punish you as well. If you are playing South Kai Sensei, you have to have more than one ally in your deck. Now, the
You
answer
brought
is
that
most
up.
of the time just two. Just play something else. So, in the first video we talked a lot about, the three allies, the Toribot, Glorio, and Android 14. Um, yeah, just put one of those guys in the deck. If you're on Future Gohan, Glorio's a good choice for Future Gohan. Toribot's a good choice for Future Gohan. That's fine. If you're, even if you're on Turles, put Android 14 in there. Put Toribot in there. Do something so that you can, if you draw your ally or if they enter on you first and they damage your ally out, you have something to do with this. Playing South Kai is already a disadvantage because his size is so small. He's got the smallest size of basically any playable sensei of the original score game, and so you're already at a disadvantage there. So if you get this blanked and this sensei doesn't do anything, man, you're gonna feel real bad about it. So play a second ally in those decks.
Yeah, you covered everything exactly as I would have said. I was really wanted to bring up the having the second ally thing. Otherwise, both of those are exactly right. I can't think of a time where I would play Piccolo Sensei that isn't just in the like dedicated small ball deck. And South Kai is only when you really, really need him. Giving up your whole Sensei for a deck that's just like, oh, I guess I'll get one of my allies out. Not worth it. So that takes us then into what we're going to call the anger senseis. Before that was always just Goku Sensei. So we'll talk about him first here. But now NZ8 has added Hybis Sensei, who fills a similar role. Now there's like places where each one of these guys feels right, and where they're not quite interchangeable. They kind of function the same way and sort of have the same like overall goal, but the specifics of why you'd want one or the other definitely vary. So Goku doesn't give you any extra anger or anything like that, but it does keep it so that you can't, get your level changed. So he's a lot more focused on a deck that wants to just kind of get to a spot and just sort of be there, be sort of safe and stuck. Um, Decks that already have either anger built into them or some kind of anger built into their mastery that's relevant are also a place, obviously, that makes more sense for Goku Sensei, since Hybis doesn't work with any of those. Whereas Hybis works more with the ones that don't have their own like traditional way to level, like a deck that has like really, really small incremental anger. Just sort of like cards here and there. Hybis can be the push that you need to kind of push yourself from level to level. It also is you have a deck that has a bunch of anger, it can help you go faster. But if you're a deck that isn't playing specifically a mastery that does that, then Hibis feels a little better in that kind of spot. There's a notable size in Sensei size, or there's a notable difference in Sensei size too. So that's just particularly relevant. But I think Hibis is a little more like aggressive in the way that you want to be leveling. He's for decks that want to be like pushing level after level after level and like moving around a lot. I think Goku makes more sense for decks that want to like get to somewhere and stay there. You kind of in the same spot, Nick?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, a couple things to add here. I really like, it's obvious what you can't do with Hibis, right? So that's the decks you can't play with Hibis. You're gonna default to Goku. You're gonna feel fine about that. Hibis has enabled a couple of interesting strategies. Things like Namekian Cell Saga with Namekian Insult that is a leveling deck that wants to level a little bit. Hibis is great for that. Orange Tapion is another spot where I've seen that kind of. Hibis is kind of creeping Orange Tapion into the realm of playability, which is cool. So like Derek kind of made the point clear, like the decks that gain incremental anger, but like maybe Goku Sensei's not enough for them to actually start doing the leveling thing pretty well. Hibis can take care of that for you. I could see Hibis in maybe like a King Vegeta type deck where you're not on MBS Saga. Maybe you're just a generic Saiyan deck, or you're playing Teamwork or something, and this can kind of help give you the push to get up to the good levels of King Vegeta and things like that. So for me, Hibis is kind of like I need to force through the anger. I'm going to use Hibis, and Goku's kind of like my deck's just going to gain anger, so I'll just play Goku, and then you can't stop me. So there's a little bit of variance there. One other thing I want to talk about with Hibis, and we ran into this a lot in testing. If you are playing Hibis and you have your invited, and your opponent is a red deck, you do not put your invited in play. Getting absolutely hosed by Red Aerial Force is a huge negative to playing Hibis. So if you are going to play your Invitus in your Hibis deck, do not put it in play against red decks.
Having aerial force work from turn zero,
Mhm.
uh, terrifying.
Yep.
Don't let that happen to you.
Okay, so the next two are a little more unique, a little more specific. So Marba and Degasu are both NZ8 senseis. They're both brand new. They're both trying to do very different things. I kind of want to talk about Degasu first, so we're going to start with that. So Degasu might as well have standard only printed on it. This is not a sensei you can play in Tough Enough, or well, you should play in Tough Enough. What Degasu does is it gives you the ability to play 1 to 3 and 1 to 4 personalities without having to worry about losing to Anger Cheese. That's super beneficial in and of itself. There are a lot of really interesting 1 to 3 kind of MPs that just don't see play in standard because you just get cheesed by, Zarbon or something like that, and you just can't play them. I'm a big proponent of Pui Pui. It's one of my favorite MPs. The worst thing about Pui Pui is that Oob or Zarbon or somebody like that just cheeses him, and there's nothing you can do. Well, now there is. So Degasu opens up a lot of, especially 1 to 3 personalities in standard. The text that add on about the Dragon Ball victory, what this does is it gets through some things like where there's life, there's hope. It just giving you one extra combat to try to push through against Dragon Ball decks is super beneficial a lot of the times because a lot of games against Dragon Ball decks is they're beating you with very few cards in their deck. So that one extra turn might be all you need. So it is a standard only sensei, but like it's a sensei that's going to make sense for the 1 to 3 decks especially. Like you're going to know when you're like, man, maybe this is a Degasu sensei deck, and a lot of those decks you're probably going to test it with both what you think would your other sensei choice would be and Degasu, and just kind of see how it feels. Moving over to Marba, this one is a little bit like obviously if you read this, if you're familiar with the game, you're going to say, oh, that's for Black Calamity. Well, okay, sure, but it's also for some other things. Any mastery that cares about the discard manipulation benefits from Marba Sensei, right? Like Red Cell Saga, obviously that one does to an extent, but I'm looking at things like Namekian Trunk Saga Mastery. Oh, you care about the bottom card of your discard pile? Well, how about you hit the 3 transform cards from your opponent's discard pile and then set the bottom of your discard pile to be drawn what you want off your mastery? There's a lot of value you can get from this. The twice per game effect is really strong because then you can be super aggressive with the first use. Your opponent throws out a colossal throw and you draw your cards and you're like, oh crap, I can't block his colossal throw. Then just throw your first activation, get a little bit of value out of it, but just stop yourself from getting overrun by powerful transform cards or something like that. Um, Marba is going to be mainly a deck where your mastery is discard manipulation, your MP is discard manipulation, something like Arinzu or something like that, where you care about the top or bottom of your discard pile, or even just if you happen to play decks that like to play stuff like Quickness Drill, Vegeta's Quickness Drill, and you can get a lot of value out of that. Goldo is another personality that's going to love Marba
Yeah,
Sensei and what he does.
well, that's great.
So the other thing is this can just be a defensive card as well. If your deck is not built to handle opponents' discard piles well in the NZ meta, you're going to be in trouble. There's a lot of discard pile stuff going on in NZ, and if you have no answers for it, you're going to have a bad time. So if you build a deck in a way that, man, I just don't have the right cards. I'm playing a red physical deck, and it's standard, so I can't play percussion concussion, and I just don't have a lot of answers for the discard pile. Like, this can shore up some of your weaknesses in that sense, right? So a lot of value here, a lot of different things you can do. Obviously, it's good with Calamity. Everybody knows that. I don't have to harp on that or anything. But these two are very unique and specific. But the times they feel good, they feel really good. And I think Marba, more so than Degasu, is going to be clear when you want it. But I think that Degasu will surprise people at how often you end up wanting it.
Yeah, I think just letting 1 through 3s be safe and standard is like worth it enough. Um, it's yeah, that card is awesome. Marba is one thing Nick kind of started to talk about with red, and something that I think that makes sense with Marba too is when your deck cares a lot about like the specific color of cards in your deck. So your like red Trunk Saga deck, your Saiyan Cell Saga deck, or your Saiyan Trunk Saga even, like things like that where like revealing a card from your deck or moving a card out of your discard pile, et cetera, like needs to be a specific color, and you have to then maximize on the number of like styled cards that you have, and you can't waste or risk slots on
Majin
percussion
Buu's heel kick.
concussions or heel kicks or
Mm-hmm.
prep crashes or whatever. Like Marba makes a lot of sense there. And granted, Glorio Draw Steel like picks up some of that slack for you now for every color. But if you don't have, I mean, like if you're just going to run like 2 copies of Glorio Draw Steel, like you're still going to lose to decks in the NZ space. Like it's just how it is. There's too many cards now that care about not necessarily just like playing cards out of your discard pile, but like putting them back in your deck or like moving them to somewhere else to do something or things like that. And if you can set it up to have better control, even if you're facing like a sand deck, like Sand Cross Block is one of the best, probably the best Sand block now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just RFG 3 Sand cards, draw a card. And like now, if you can use Marba to rip a couple of Sand cards out of discard pile so they can't get away with a full draw a card off of their physical block. Like even things like that are the little ways that NZ like impacts discard pile. And so having just one card in your deck or something that can handle picking discard piles apart is not enough. So if your deck is really fighting for styled space, Marva can help pick up the other end of that slack for you. Then that takes us into what we're going to call the big four. These are the four like powerhouses. Before it would have been the big three. Pansy is the sort of newly crowned, I think, queen of this pile here. But all four of these, especially the three to the left, have been historically always the most played senseis in the game. North Kai is like the Goku. I mean, we started in the Go 2 is what I started to say. Well, at the beginning of the video, I said like North Kai isn't always just the card you put in every sensei deck. But I make that joke because like that happens. People just build a deck and they're like, I have to play North Kai Sensei. That's the sensei that exists in this game, and it's not. It's great and is obviously part of the Mount Rushmore of senseis for a reason, but it's not the only choice. Same with West Kai. West Kai sees a ton of play too, but there are times where just slamming a West Kai in your deck is not the most maximized use of deck space, or sensei power to deck space ratio, I guess, as well as Roshi, just like +1/-1. That this one sees a lot of play, I think, in decks I think don't necessarily need it. Sometimes that like +1/-1 is not enough of like a net gain to really be worth it. There are decks where I think this card is super good, but I think that this one sees like there are people who just slap this into too many things too. So we want to take some time to kind of dig into each one of these a little bit more as to like what they're for and why. We'll get to Pansy last, I think, because she's the newest, and I think covering the other three will make the most sense as we get into talking about her as well. Um, but Nick, I'll let you kind of go first and just kind of pick a guy and run with it.
Okay, I like to start with Weskai here because I think of the four of them, he's kind of the most clear. So Weskai, one of the first uses I ever found for Weskai that makes perfect sense to everybody who realizes it is if your deck doesn't like Victreal, Weskai can answer Victreal. If you are playing an MPPV deck and like your deck is a core MPPV deck, Weskai is probably going to be your sensei a lot of the time. Um, any decks that are dead to very common, very specific non-combats, that's when you want Weskai. Or a lot of Dragon Ball decks that are 85 card decks, they also want Weskai. So, I play it in the Goku Lineage Young Again Ball deck because, it's an answer to a drill or it's an answer to a random non-combat that you might be afraid of or something like that. And the deck blocks well enough, and most control decks do, and it plays defense well enough that you don't need Pansy. It plays offense well, or it doesn't play offense enough, so you're not looking to play Northkai. You're not looking to play Roshi and push through damage. So when you're kind of looking for that middle ground where it's like, well, no card actually like stands out and screams at me. Like Westkai's versatility to just hitting your opponent's fatherly, hitting your opponent's, don't you just hate that? Hitting a random drill that might be bothering you, or orange destruction drill or something powerful like that. So I think Weskai to me is the most linear of these choices. I think if you're on a true MPPV shell, Weskai is one of the ones you're going to look at. I think if you're on a 85 card ball deck, Weskai is one of the ones I want to look at for that. So those are kind of the specific uses I have for Weskai. It's when you know in your mind what you're targeting. Like if I build a deck and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not worried about Victorial and there's nothing that screams at me that I need an answer for this. I'm not going to put Weskai in that deck. Like Weskai's not a generic one you just shove into decks. But like
No.
in the decks where Weskai is good, it's clear that he's going to be his power is going to be the sensei that you want. Now, another reason is because his deck size is so much smaller, right? You're not gonna want to default to the guy who's got 7 when you could default to the 13 or 14 here at the end.
Yep, 100%. Uh, I want to talk now a little bit about Northkai. So Northkai, obviously, as I've joked about, like I think overall sees the most play. If you were to look at just number of decks, it's Northkai most often. And I think that will change with some of the NZ inclusions, but um, historically, I think it's Northkai. 13 being the like highest slot with an effect, just made it the default choice a lot of the times. Twice per game, getting to turn off your opponent's mastery is so crazy good. There's so many. I mean, I don't know. I don't have to explain why Northkai is good, but what I want to talk about is like when it's not right to use Northkai. And I think there are a lot of people who play Northkai just because, oh, his effect's really good, and if I enter and turn off their mastery, and now they can't draw cards, or now they can't do this, that, or the other thing, that's going to be great. And like that's all cool and dandy, but like, how many times are you entering? If your answer isn't every single turn, uh, or most of them, Northkai is probably not actually your answer. It in the past, I think a better answer is almost just playing like Elder Kai. Just because you get a huge number of slots, that's fine. If you're not entering anyway, like run the value that you would get from him. North Kai is like for the aggressive deck. If you're the kind of deck that says I'm going to enter 2 times, that's going to be as close to enough to kill you as it can be, and I'm going to turn off your mastery both times and just like send it. That's where you put Northkai. If you're going to enter like most turns and you're waiting on like your perfect hand, but you're going to enter on most of them anyway, Northkai's still pretty good there. I just think that there are too many people who just fall like this is the one I want to use. And I've seen so many games. I mean, if you even go back and like watch the YouTube channel, there are like plenty of times where you watch some of the videos and there are people like 6, 7, 8 combats into the game and they have not finished using their Northkai or even used it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Obviously you've wasted your sensei if that's what's happening. You've got 8 cards left in your deck and you haven't Northkai yet. Like, what game are we playing? Why do you have a Northkai? That's the spots where I think people need to like stop putting North-Kais, as they're just sort of like default Sensei I put in my deck. I think there's so many better options you can use if that's the way your deck plays. And I think you're just wasting like all of the power a Sensei could give you if you're not going to enter combat regularly enough to maximize North-Kai.
Yeah, I mean, North Kai is all about aggression, right? Like, Derek kind of summed it up, but to be a little more specific, if you're, I mean, I would draw practice hands when you get your deck going. And if you're not ready to enter with 80% of the hands you draw, you should not be playing North Kai. Or if you're a deck like, the Yamcha energy deck, right? Like, that deck's going to enter a lot against certain decks and not enter a lot against other decks. Those decks don't want North Kai either. So the decks where you want North-Kai are the decks where it's like I'm, saying Broly, and I'm gonna draw cards and enter, and I'm gonna attack you. That's what a North-Kai deck looks like. North-Kai decks are aggressive. They are entering combat religiously. They are drawing cards. They are trying to put pressure. If your deck is a deck that, like in certain matchups you want to put pressure, and in certain matchups you want to pull back and play defense, that's not a North-Kai deck. North-Kai decks are aggression, pressure, pressure.
Hmm.
So let's move over to Master Roshi. So for the longest time, the big difference has been what do you do when you don't want to play North Guy, right? What do you do, especially in those hybrid decks where it's like sometimes I want to enter a lot and sometimes I don't want to enter a lot. Well, that's when people would always default to playing Roshi. I think that Roshi is both incredibly overplayed and incredibly underplayed, and let me try to explain why. I think that people don't understand how this card really works when this card is really good. Um, so at the end of the day, the goal of all the senseis, just like every other card you put in the deck, is to further your chances to win the game. Right? So how does North Kai do that? North Kai does that by shutting off your opponent's mastery so that you can get a card advantage engine or a modifier engine or some buff over your opponent that he loses his mastery for. Roshi is all about incremental. Everything about Roshi is about incremental damage. It's about taking a little less damage, and dealing a little more damage. So when's Roshi good? For me, Roshi's good in a deck that is mostly defensive but wins by attacking. So what does that look like? Well, my Mr. Popo Eradication deck from the first main event this year, it played Roshi. And why did it play Roshi? Well, because the deck is very defensive. It was about discarding cards, and then it beats you by hitting you with 1 to 2 attacks per combat. So Roshi is just amplifying what every attack can do. He's pushing cards into a play where they can capture Dragon Balls and things like that. He's also just reducing damage so that if I hit you with one attack and you hit me with one attack, I'm going to win the combat. And so a lot of what Roshi does is the incremental stuff. You don't want to play Roshi in a deck where you're throwing 8 attacks. I know that seems counterintuitive, but you're going to get more value out of North Kai in those decks than you are Roshi most of the time. Roshi is about incremental value. It's about I'm playing a villain energy deck with 3 solar flares and 3 jolting slashes, and I'm going to try to stop all your physicals, and I'm going to hit you with 2 attacks every turn. And I'm going to get 2 attacks out of Roshi. And then the next combat I'm going to get 2 life cards extra out of Roshi. And then we're going to play 12 combats. That's when Roshi's good. Roshi's good when you are stretching out the game and you're playing very long, drawn out games with lots of combats. If you're on North Kai, you don't want to play 8 or 9 combats. You want to kill them quickly. If you're on Roshi, that's when you're willing to say, okay, I'm going to settle in. We're going to have an 8 combat game, a 10 combat game, and I'm going to get +3, +4 life cards between my attacks and your attacks doing less every single combat. That's my goal. That's where you want Roshi.
Perfectly said. And then brings us to Pansy. Like I said, she's the newest here, but I think fits in so well into this like big four like faces of Sensei deck space that the other three do. So 14, obviously, huge number slots, even more than North Kai, who we were talking about being the best. But as we talked about with North Kai and the kind of issue that you have and the times you wouldn't play North Kai, Pansy is for those times. North Kai is I want to punch you 2 combats in a row and we're done. Pansy is I don't want to enter combat. I want to sit back. I want to build up my defenses. I want to draw a hand that sort of reacts to the way you play, and I get value out of. I mean, incremental is a good way to put it too, but like I'm going to get responsive value to you. I'm not the aggressor. I am the responder. Pansy is great in those situations. Having the 2 blocks And knowing the right time to use them, of course, is like a big player skill important factor. And as you play your Pansy Sensei more, you'll find the times that it feels more right to use those blocks. It's not always use them right at the beginning. It's not always clutch the pearls of those blocks until the very end of the game. Sometimes it's a little of both. Sometimes it switches. You'll just kind of feel that a little more as you use her. But the geez, the 14 slot count on her opens up so much for like it fills that sort of same um, deck size philosophy thing that North Kai would, but is the literal exact opposite side of the coin. And she is as good, I think, as many times as North Kai is, just in the other half of the decks.
Yeah, so I think Derek said the key thing here, which is I think that Pansy is a very, very high skill level card. And it's kind of funny with how basic and simple it is, but knowing which attacks are worth using this Sensei to stop is a huge skill in and of itself. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is if successful effects, right? Like Pansy's hitting powerful if successful effects is where her real power lies. It's protecting you from getting colossal thrown or something like that. It's always having something that can block an attack that your opponent can't do anything about. So you can't, it's hard for your opponent to turn off your sensei. So just having this in your back pocket against if successful attacks is super strong. I like this card a lot in a lot of the same decks that I like Roshi, and that kind of leads into a little bit of problem about okay, well which one do you play when? Well, unfortunately that question's a lot more complex than we have any time to go into today. But the overall, for me, the easiest way to look at this is kind of look at what your matchups are, right? So if your worst matchups are decks that chain attacks or that have powerful you know like blue and red and the physical decks that hit you 6 or 7 times, Roshi's not going to do for you against those decks what Pansy can do. Pansy cutting off a critical blow or a colossal throw or something powerful like that to stop them from hitting you multiple more times in that combat is so much stronger than Roshi against those decks. So for me, I'm analyzing my deck and I'm saying, okay, which one of these is actually better for my deck? Which one of these is actually more important for my deck? And if it's close, or if you're just like, man, I don't have an answer, Pansy gets 5 more Sensei deck slots. So if if you're needed a tiebreaker, that's your tiebreaker. Pansy is a great sensei to play in all kind of defensive decks. If you are a defensive beatdown deck, I think Pansy's going to see a ton of play in Tough Enough. I think she's a great Tough Enough sensei. I think that people aren't so sure what to do with their sensei deck in Tough Enough as much, but there are cards you should be considering senseiing that people don't. There are other also different ways to sensei, like one thing that I've done a few times and I've seen other people picking up is playing multiple different battlegrounds and locations in your Sensei deck and just bringing in the one that's relevant in that game. And like with the extra 5 slots, especially in Tough Enough, Pansy's going to give you the ability to do all that. And she's still going to be able to stop their percussion concussion from removing your discard pile or something like that. So there's a lot of value to be had here. I think that if you have no idea what you're doing and you're just like building a deck and you don't want to take any advice, like the best sensei you could just pick out of the dark and slap on a deck is Pansy. That's the one I would do. I think Roshi has always been the default sensei, and then Northkai's like, well, I'm a beatdown deck. I'm gonna play Northkai. Well, there's times for that, times not for that. But like Pansy is just the opposite, where when you are the control deck, or when you are maybe the energy deck that maybe doesn't go super aggressive but is still a beatdown deck, Pansy's gonna feel awesome. Okay, so now we're to the rest. So I'm going to kind of skim through this a little bit, and then I'll let Derek open up a little bit about it too. Unfortunately, I think that there's not a single deck I've ever seen that Grand Kai and East Kai are playable in. I know that it's unfortunate, but I cannot figure out a single deck I would play either one of these two cards in. Supreme Kai Sensei, I think it's a little bit closer. I believe there exists a deck out there where Supreme Kai Sensei is the right choice. I haven't found it yet. I think it's there. I think that you could build a deck where that makes sense. I don't know what it is. 11's a decent number, but man, there's a little bit to be desired here. So the last thing I want to talk about is Elder Kai. Most people who are familiar with the league kind of know that I have been the Elder Kai guy for quite some time. I love Sensei decks. I love to play Sensei cards. I have a very specific and unique attack to how to build a Sensei deck, and Elder Kai having 21 slots is a ton. It's a ton of slots. Um, so I would argue that although I agree Pansy Sensei is a very skill intensive card, it's not nowhere near the level of skill intensive that Elder Kai is. You are giving up your Sensei's power. You have to maximize that. And if you can't figure out how to do that, then playing this is not good for you. I think that Elder Kai is a bit more playable than the rest of these. I think it's less playable now because Pansy has 14 slots and has 2 blocks, and like that is a big loss even just to add the 7 cards. So I think it's a lot more narrow now than it used to be. But black decks that don't care too much about the cards in their main deck that might want to bring in 12 cards in every matchup, they can still play Elder Kai. So there are spots where Elder Kai still makes sense. I think that most people that play Elder Kai are just, it's too cute, and you should stop being cute and just play something with a power that's a little stronger. But I do think there are still spots for Elder Kai. I think that you could build your deck in a way where you think you can beat every beatdown matchup, and you just pile all of your anti-control stuff into Elder Kai, and then just bring in 20 cards against control. So there are the spots where I still think Elder Kai has value, but overall, these guys are the 4 you want to avoid. These are the 4 that you're gonna. They're just the power level is so far lacking compared to the other senseis we've discussed so far.
Yeah, Nick and I have, slightly different philosophies with like deck building and like what makes a thing fun. And it's not even like that far apart because I'll get into this. I have been known to do some decks and like decks that are like cuter than Nick would build. And that's just to say that Nick doesn't build, some nonsense. Like he's got historical wins with like fucking Chaozu. Like it's not that it's unheard of for him to play some cheese, but I think that there are times where like building the cute deck that's like doing a silly thing is like is plenty fun. But despite that difference in our like philosophy, I think Nick's completely right that like there are plenty of times where if you're trying to play Elder Kai, like that is the wrong kind of cute and just don't do it. It's not for if you're not if you aren't the kind of player who like knows exactly which six to bring in and where and like which decks they're for and like if you have Elder Kai and you have no power on your whole sensei for the whole game, you have to have known, okay, so the 21 cards in this deck, every single slot has to be like maximized. I have to know exactly why I want each card in here. It's not the sensei where you're like, well, I guess I put in 2 deceptions because that's pretty good, and I guess 2 freezes or not freezes, 2 cells presence because like that's pretty good sometimes, and I guess I put in perfect defense or not perfect defense. God damn it. Threatening position. I don't know why perfect defense came to my mind, but like that's not how you build an Elder Kai Sensei deck. You're building a deck where you're like, okay, so I know that my deck handles beatdown. That's what it's for, or whatever. So I know against the Dragon Ball decks, which I know specifically what are because that's why I picked this Sensei. I know that I need to put in like these 6 ball hate cards. If I'm facing a drill or stasis deck and I know that I need to have like specific drill answers because my deck doesn't have enough of those, and I'm also the player that knows just looking at your mastery and MP what deck you're going to be playing will have those. That's where you're going to play Elder Kai. He still I think has a ton of value, just because 21 is an absurdly huge number, but it's not as just it's not like a bucket you just like throw ideas into. You have to like know why you're playing all 21 of these cards and exactly the moment you're putting those in if you're going to give up a whole ass sensei power to just have extra slots. And Nick's perfectly correct on the rest of these. Stern Kai maybe, East Kai, Grand Kai, sorry, those cards don't exist. Don't play them. Don't worry about them. All right, so that takes us like out of the specific senseis and when and why that we kind of wanted to cover. So now we want to get a little bit more into the the thought that goes behind what goes into your Sensei deck, and not just your Sensei, but what goes into the deck slots you get. So the first thing is you really need to be aware of and discover like the weaknesses of your deck. You can't just build a deck and slap like the various good stuff Sensei deck together and hope and expect that it will do as much for you as someone who effectively uses their Sensei deck to cover their weak spots. Nick and I have talked about this a bit in the past that like some people build this kind of idea where they want their deck to sort of be good against everything or like, playable into everything. And I think that the I think Nick will agree that's like the wrong concept. There's too many strategies, and especially with NZ, like there's an increasing number of them every day that you can't have your deck be perfect. So there will definitely be decks where you are weak against certain things. And as you play your deck more and familiarize yourself with what's in it, you'll start to realize, like, my deck is fine against other beatdown decks. It's fine against a ball deck or whatever. But it turns out that I can't handle a drill deck. I just have one card that hits drills at all, and I don't know what to do. I built my energy deck and it's cool, but if they stick an Android 21 or 20's absorbing drill, and it turns out I don't actually have any non-combat removal in my deck. So uh, I guess I just lose now. So if that's the way you're playing, you'll realize that as you start to like get better at building your deck, and, and that's what your Sensei deck should be for, is covering those spots. So we think there's like kind of four like general weak spots. There are like other spots you could be kind of weak or whatever, but the four that like I think are really important to note, and the reason your Sensei deck should cover them for most decks is the following four: Dragon Ball decks, Drill decks, Anger decks, and Ally decks. If your deck has a weakness into any of these four that you've discovered, um, you'll as we get into more of this section, we're going to break down kind of each one of these and what cards go into which weakness and why. Obviously, your deck could be like, I'm weak to beatdown, but then if you're weak to beatdown, then your deck is like probably just bad because that's just the like that's win con number one. So if you're just losing to the way you play the card game, then like what is your deck doing? Um, and you could argue that like, oh, my ball deck's weak to beat down because if they hit me too hard, I lose my ball. Like that's not being weak to beat down because your ball deck will answer. You'll just get out of combat. So it's not like that's your being strong against beatdown. Beatdown would be your risk, sure, but it's not your weakness. So that's the reason like beatdown decks aren't on here, because if beatdown is your weakness, start over and build something different. Because I don't know how you built a deck that's bad against beatdown. It's that part doesn't make sense because that's just like the core part of the game. You're just playing cards makes you playable into beatdown decks.
Yeah, that's a key thing with the beatdown decks and why they're not listed on here is that, in theory, all of the cards you put in your deck should be useful against beatdown decks. You're playing blocks and attacks; they should be useful against beatdown decks. Um, but these specific four strategies are things that you need to have more specific targeted things for. Drill decks is one that's really easy to understand. If you're on red and you're playing against a drill deck, you probably have red energy blast, and then you either have Annihilation or Vigor Orb, probably. So, like, that is a very limited number of ways to target drill decks. So, if I'm a red deck, generally speaking, drill decks are going to be something that's in my mind when I'm senseiing. Anger's another good example, right? Like, generally speaking, after you built a deck, you can look at it and say, okay, is this deck going to be good against Anger decks or not? And if the answer is no, you need to prepare in the Sensei deck for that. And if the answer is yes, then you don't, and you move on. Allies is exactly the same way, right? Physical beatdown decks tend to be not as good against allied decks. Energy beatdown decks tend to be just fine against allied decks. So, if I'm a physical beatdown deck, I'm going to look for ways to answer my allies. If I'm an energy beatdown deck, I mean, I'm still going to have some, but like I'm probably not playing the like very targeted specific anti-ally cards in an energy beats deck because generally speaking, they're not as much of a threat. So, just kind of that is what discovering what your deck is not good against is the first key to senseiing correctly. What do I need help against? And then after that, we can start to look at how to help you. So,
Right. So
oh, go ahead.
what if it's Dragon Ball?
Okay, so if it's Dragon Ball, we'll start with Huh. Huh is one of the most universally accepted put this card in your Sensei deck cards that exist in the game. Huh just automatically removes a Dragon Ball from the game. It's a non-combat. It's limit one. Um, it's I don't want. It's probably the most all-inclusive standard tough Sensei deck card that exists because it just auto beats all Dragon Ball decks. Right? Every Dragon Ball deck, if they get one Dragon Ball removed, they lose the game. So Huh sees a lot of play in that sense. Now, if you are actively bad against Dragon Balls, then you have to determine what kind of Dragon Ball deck you're bad against, right? So the two Dragon Ball decks that see the most play are the Earth Dragon Ball, generally Speedball type decks, and the Namek Dragon Ball, generally 85 card decks. So depending on what you're playing, could greatly tell you which one of those you angles you want to attack, right? If I'm playing an MPPV deck, I can't beat Speedball. You can't beat the Earth Speedball deck. I've played a lot of Red MPPV Broly, which I believe is the best Red MPPV deck in the game. It does not beat Roshi Speedball. So my Sensei deck is Huh and 3 Kami Fates. That's what I'm doing because I know that if I don't draw one of those cards, I can't win the game. Now, if I am on an MPPV deck, I actually have a fairly good matchup against a lot of the Namek Ball decks. So I'm never going to play Guru Fates in those decks. So a lot of what you're looking for is what decks actually matter. If you're on a physical beats deck that has 3 Gohan's Kick and 3 Majin Buu's Fury and all of those, maybe you're better against the Speedball deck. If you're playing something like Vinegar that's got an unstoppable attack, or if you're playing, if you're playing Piercing Beam and Krillin Seat Seeking Blast, you're probably fine into speedball decks. So in that case, how do you do against Namek Ball decks? Maybe I would look more at that. If you're a mastery that cares specifically about you have to have your mastery on at all time, your blue and light and something like that. That's the kind of decks I would be more interested in playing Guru Fates in because those decks are going to give you a lot more trouble. The last card I want to talk about, Blackwater Confusion Drill. As far as when to play this card, I actually don't think this card is that good. I want this card specifically if I'm playing freestyle because freestyle and orange MBS can protect the drill, and that gives you your value. So if you're on freestyle or you're on orange MBS and you can put this card into play, and your opponent has to have very specific answers to get rid of it, that's a pretty strong place to be. Um, for example, if I'm playing Orange and BS, I'm not playing Kami Fates probably. I'm probably not playing Guru Fates, but I probably have 2 to 3 copies of Blackwater Confusion Drill in my Sensei deck, and that's how I'm trying to beat the ball decks. So if you're not good against ball decks, these are kind of the core anti-ball decks. Now, could you play Gohan's Kick, Piercing Beam in your Sensei deck? Yeah, you could. Generally, you're not going to want to do that. You're going to want to have those in your main deck. They're pretty good otherwise. But as far as the big 4 answers to Dragon Ball decks, these are the ones you're going to talk about. The other Dragon Ball style, the Dende Ball style, there's no fades for Dende, so you're going to bring in your Huh and things like that. And then those decks are just generally going to play so much differently that you'll be able to attack them a lot easier with the cards in your deck. Also, the Dende balls are just much less powerful than the Earth and Namek balls, so they'll be a lot less impactful on the game.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect I think that's a perfect analysis. I think that the decks that will care. I just that's the way I want to phrase this. I don't think that there's a deck that I can really think of where I think the right answer would be to have like 3 commies and 3 gurus. I just don't think that's what you're gonna do. Um,
No.
I maybe if you're like an Elder Guy deck, but even then, I don't think that that's right per se.
Yeah.
I think your deck, the build of your deck at its core should be good enough against like one or the other, because the strategies for those decks are so different that having both is just like wasted sensei space. So that then takes us into drills. We've just got 2 cards here. Obviously, there are other things that you could like maybe think about in a sensei deck, depending on your build. But these are kind of the 2 core ones. So 17 Smirks is the villain's only kind of staple. It's been around forever, but removing all of their drills and play from the game, uh, this is super relevant, super strong into into freestyle and stuff where their drills can be discarded. So that's uh, I think the decks where like that card is good. It's kind of obvious what it's good against. And then deception is not so much like deception. I think is a little better against things like Orange MBS or um, not that we've seen a ton of it, but that's like what it was for. The sort of Camp 2 Vegeta, Camp Settled Down sort of deck that will play some drills and work out that way. Um, Deception is really, really good there. Obviously, there's like any drill deck can just sort of lose its drills when it levels. So Freeze's Deception is good into all those anyway. But if your deck is going to be like slotting deceptions, what you're doing is you're putting them in to face off the decks um that that protect their drills just by the exist one where your other discard shuffle whatever drills cards are less relevant because of focusing drill, that you need something that can kind of step over that. That's what deception is obviously for. Now, you're going to play deception, I think, in most Sensei decks, like period, because I think I mean, there's probably some debate that we could have here, but I think I will say relatively comfortably that I still think the best deck in the game is Orange MBS. And I think that like drill stasis decks as a whole are just still incredibly, incredibly strong. They don't see a ton of representation for uh, whatever like societal reason or whatever, but like I think that they are still the best deck. They still demand so much of your attention to be able to beat them, so much of the way your deck has to be built to be able to touch them otherwise, that I think it's just worth having deceptions around, um, because even if you don't think they're going to be around, like we don't see a ton of the Orange MBS deck being played in this league. Um, I still would always have this card personally. I know some of these are like this goes in sometimes and this goes in here. For me, deception is one that I kind of always default to, like every deck is just going to be good at having is going to like having deception. That's going to be strong every time that you have it. Maybe Nick will have a different opinion when he kind of loops around to talk about this, but generally, that one specifically, I think is just always good. But deception, for example, doesn't do anything against a freestyle deck, right? So that's where your smirks and things like that would be more relevant. When Nick and I were kind of talking about this video, one of the cards I brought up is sort of like the force bubble kind of comment from the start of the video. I was like, well, do you think maybe like drills are for the week should be on here? And Nick was like, well, no, because I think that drills for the week, discarding all the drills, is so much worse than smirks. Having the drills discarded means Orange MBS can still put them back in their deck at the end of turn. It means they can still get them back with other stuff. Against blue, they can like blue negation it back out. Against freestyle, it just does nothing again. So you still need 17 Smirks' like role is still obviously very, very relevant and very obvious. If your matchup is bad into like a freestyle drill deck or something, or you don't have some other way to like handle that kind of thing, um, Smirks is a good spot for you. If you're on a hero deck or something, obviously you're not going to play this, but like if you're playing, Bulma's Ultimatum or something, and you're putting cards back, you're like shuffling cards back into their deck. Maybe you still have a way to hit drills against a freestyle deck, and maybe Smirks isn't as needed for you. But I think that it's pretty tough if you let a freestyle deck get going um, without being able to answer their drills. So if you don't have a card that will like turn off their mastery or something like that, that some of the other like Saiyan just has some of those, and some colors just have attacks that can just turn that stuff off. And if you've got those, then obviously Smirks is less relevant for your deck because you have another out to it. But I think it still stands as a card that has so much as the like this is the sort of obvious answer to drill cards, that I think it's like earned its spot on this little slide here.
the only thing I really have to add to the drill conversation is that drill is one thing that a lot of styled cards have answers for. So if you are, whatever style you're in, there's probably a card or two that can answer drills efficiently in that style. And so like instead of putting, all the styled cards on here, we're not going to go through that trouble. But like you'll know, I brought up, if I'm on a red physical beats deck, I like to play Vigor Orb in the Sensei deck of a lot of those decks because if the deck is I feel is weak to drills or weak to allies, a card like Vigor Orb coming in and just hitting one of those is super valuable. The big thing I want to talk about here is Frieza's Deception, and I know this is kind of the quote unquote drill section, but Frieza's Deception, this just made sense as a spot to put for it. This is like one of the best like casting a wide net kind of cards that exist in the game now. If your opponent is on a Camp 1 deck or a drill deck, this is the best card in your deck against them probably. And it's wild because like you'll bring this card in against beatdown decks sometimes. If your
Mhm.
opponent's on Vinegar or Goldo or something where it's like my level 1 is great, Raditz, my level 1 is great, my level 2 is terrible. Frieza's Deception's incredible in those matchups. So I think that Frieza's Deception is the best Sensei deck card there is. If you are actively Sensei decking, I probably have 2 to 3 of these in my Sensei deck at all times. When I play full Dragon Ball decks, I play this in the main because I think the card is that powerful that you just need to be able to access this somewhere in your build.
Yep.
One other freestyle kind of anti-drill card I want to talk about. It's a lot weaker overall, but there are times where it has value. Is Aura Clash. Aura Clash / Are You Tough Enough? Obviously, gaining yourself levels is most of the time what you see those cards for, but I really like them as anti-drill cards in the decks that are like, oh, I got a level. Okay, cool. I'm playing Blue Boo. And it's like, okay, well, if I Aura Clash you, I get to go be level 2 Kid Boo. All right, cool, whatever. That sounds great. So, and a lot of times those cards don't actually make the Sensei deck. They're more main deckable. But, like, there are ways that you can shore up your drill matchup with just your main deck cards, with things like Aura Clash. Now, obviously, not as strong. Winter Countryside exists. A lot of drill decks are going to be on Winter Countryside. So it's obviously going to have its weaknesses. But most of your anti-drill package is going to be style based. I think if you're a villain and there's some drills that bother you or you don't have a lot of drill answers, Smirks is an auto include. I think that if you're Android, Smirks is an auto include because of the ability to go get it and stuff like that. Because I mean, how many drills do you realistically need to hit for Smirks to feel great, right? Like if you hit 2 good drills, yeah, you probably feel pretty good about your Smirks, right? Like you don't have to hit 7 drills to feel good about Smirks. If your opponent's playing freestyle and has a dev drill and a quickness drill in play and you smirks them, that's a huge win. So, a lot of these
Um,
cards, although they are catch-alls and they do a lot, they can hit a lot. You don't have to hit them all to feel great. So, yeah, Smirks again. You should know when you want it. Deception is a card you should just play. You should just put it in your decks. Stop questioning it.
I'm glad you brought that up about Smirks. I've definitely seen people like rip a Smirks off the top of their deck and then just clutch it, trying to be like, I'm gonna wait until they get 3 or 4 more drills in play, and I'm gonna get them for 6 or 7 or 8, or
Mhm.
I'm clear their whole board, and then they just lose to the fact that like 3 super strong drills stayed on the table for 4 combats.
Or they just
Um,
lose to Spec Ops drill when they could have just
yeah,
smirched the one Spec Ops drill and it's like save 10 life cards of damage. Like, come on, guys.
yep, yep, yeah. Sometimes the value of the 1 or 2 drills can put out uh, on their own without just being attached to. I hit a bunch of drills now. Is so much. Smirks is worth so much more than dealing with whatever effect that was going to give you. Like, imagine if you're playing a, I don't know, a orange villain deck. We'll say Janemba or something, right?
Hmm?
And your opponent has a halting drill out, and you're like, oh, well, I'm gonna wait till they get some more other, gonna get some other things out, and then, well, now I can't. None of my physicals are gonna do anything, which is my whole physical deck. I don't want to just wait to see if they hit more drills or whatever. Getting even if I smirks for one halting drill, it's gonna feel incredible because I just turned on 60 life cards of damage over the next 2 turns because of getting rid of that card. So just I think that our takeaway here is like the don't overvalue the smirks can hit every single card on the table. Like it doesn't have to wait until you can hit every drill they have. Just drop it when you get it. Hit the two that are just like killer while they're on the table. Obviously, don't burn it right away if you're playing against your opponent's drill deck and they've got one like whatever drill on the table, and you're like, well, that feels who cares? Like leave it, let it sit. But um think more about the value of the drill that's on the table
Hmm.
is sometimes worth it. Like getting rid of that one drill is worth the smirks. It
Yep.
doesn't have to hit 6, 7, 8 cards to be, oh, I got the payoff of smirks. RFGing something huge, just one card even, can make the literal difference between winning or losing that game.
Absolutely. Okay.
So then
Oh,
anger.
all right.
You can go ahead.
So anger is an interesting win condition in this game. It kind of plays the game differently than all the other strategies do, in that it cares a lot less about the damage it does and the damage it takes, and it's kind of playing a different game altogether. So there's a couple ways to battle anger decks. The number one and the best one is self-starting position. If you're a villain and your deck is not like if your deck is super tuned to beat anger decks, if you're blue, if you're red roll games, and like the fact that you losing to an anger deck is basically non-existent, then just you can skip this slide for this purpose. You don't need to hear about this. But if you're not that and you're a villain, you should probably play Stealth Threatening. Stealth Threatening is an excellent card. I mean, most of the time when you play this card, you win the game. That those are what you're looking for with a lot of these Sensei deck cards. Cards like Huh and cards like Cell Threatening, most of the time read, you win the game. Doesn't get much better than that. So if you're looking for other anti-anger cards, there's a couple directions to go. So we kind of group these into two categories. We're going to start with the non-combats. I chose Severe Bruises, but there's a suite of these cards. There's Goku's Heart Disease, there's Terrible Wounds, whatever. All of them are non-combats that attach, put your opponent's anger to 0, and they have to do some kind of effect to make it go away, or non-combat removal type effects, right? So the key with this is figuring out what kind of anger decks you're afraid of and which one of these makes the most sense to play, right? These are also tech supportable, which is interesting. It's if your deck's already doing the tech support thing, then I like to lean towards these non-combats in your Sensei deck because they are also tech supportable. Another thing is a note that Awful Abrasions, which is the one that says Dragon Ball instead of Drill like Severe Bruises, is not limit 1. Therefore, you can Yajirobe it. So if you are playing a deck that has Yajirobe as the MP or an ally, then that might be one you're interested in. There's another one called Mind Control Device, which is probably a little weaker overall, but it does actively shut down the Broly Paragus deck that is probably the best MPP deck in the game currently. So that's got a lot of value too. So, generally, if you're a non-combat deck, or if you got a lot of ways to get non-combats or activate non-combats, then the non-combat shell is a good way to answer anger. But if you don't, another way is with some variations of attacks. My personal favorite is Goku Setup Strike. It is an energy attack. It does have to be successful. Now, I will say that most MPPV decks do not care that much about blocking attacks, so it is not that hard to get this through. It lowers them 2 levels, which is a good amount of, that's for all intents and purposes 10 anger, so that's pretty useful. It is Saiyan Heritage only, which does limit it a little bit into what you can play it, because it only you can only play it with specific MPs. But that's not the only card that does this. Goku's Dashing Punch, physical for 8 stages, sets your opponent's anger to 0, limit 1 per deck. If you're on a physical beats deck and you don't think you can beat anger decks, that's a card you can include in your deck as a one of. Now there are some weaker variations of this too. There is I'm blanking on the name, but there's a Goku card that's from the Frieza saga. It's a physical for 7 stages that can't do life cards, and it sets your opponent's anger to 0. There's some of the style cards, things like Blue Head Charge, that sets your opponent's anger to 0 and they can't gain anger. There's a freestyle one called Vegeta's Elbow Slam that says if your opponent's red, they lose a personality level. So there's a lot of attacks like that that have effects that prevent the MPPV kind of style. So if you are a deck that is not good against MPPV, if the red decks can rush you real fast, if your cards just don't generically have a lot of anti-anger on them, which some you might be surprised at which ones do and which ones don't. Saiyan, for example, does not have a lot of generic anti-MPPV stuff, but Namekian does. So a lot of times in your Namekian decks, you're going to need less anti-anger than you would need in a Saiyan deck, because the Namekian cards by default, things like Shield Destruction, just lower your opponent's anger a lot of the time. So it's something that you need to be cognizant of when you're deck building, and which way, either the non-combat way or the attack way, is beneficial for you to have your anti-anger. But you definitely have to be aware that anger exists. Unless you are playing, a blue deck, a red world games deck, something that just hoses your opponent's anger, maybe a Goma or something like that, you really need to figure out which style of anti-anger helps you the most, and you need some access to it because you don't want to just lose to the anger deck because you're not prepared.
Yeah, and like just like we've said before, with some of the other slots and slides here, is that they're like styled cards that can do this kind of thing too, right? And so we'll eventually in these like perfect score kind of videos get into like your individual deck cores and stuff and where cards will be good. But there's blue energy throws, there's red mouth cannons, stuff like that that can shore up this kind of level variance stuff that your weaknesses could be too. And if you're already on a styled deck, um, like those might be cards that use Sensei as well. You might just be maining them if that's like if you're worried enough that your weakness in your deck is your opponent MPPVing you, then you've probably already got those styled cards in your deck. But those you might Sensei or whatever too. But obviously, we didn't want to cover every single styled card in each of these slots that can do this. We don't have Saiyan Inspection up here with Severe Bruises,
Mhm.
stuff like that. So I know that's not quite the same thing, but you know what I mean, like just the kind of control card type thing like that. The attach and do something stuff. Uh, there's the point is there's styled cards that do this kind of thing too, and your deck can um, lean on those more if that's something that is your style. But these are sort of more global approaches to the concepts involved. So allies is our next little section here. Ally decks are if you sit down across from an ally deck and you let an ally deck set its little wall up and it's good at doing it, you're gonna be in trouble. Those decks can hit you for 8 times 5 life card energy attacks a turn. They can hit you for a bunch of physicals. There's like a whole bunch of things that they can do if you're playing against Bojack allies or Bojack even specifically. They have a bunch of really techy effects too. Uh, if you let those decks just run away and do their thing, you're gonna have a bad time. As we just talked about with styled cards, there are a lot of cards in the styles themselves that do just facilitate ally hate. Um, and I would say of the deck like weaknesses, I personally think ally is like one of the ones that is kind of the easiest to shore up defense against because there are just a ton of cards that just hit allies. They're just everywhere. And so if your deck is weak to those, you have plenty of options um, to cover your bases. Now that said, some of them, like Saiyan's a slightly bad example because they tend to play a little bit hybrid anyway. But like Saiyan's best ally removal cards are 2 energy attacks, right? And if you're a just Saiyan physical deck, maybe it feels bad to throw those 2 energy attacks. It doesn't. Here's the spoiler alert. It doesn't feel bad because if you're a physical deck and they have a bunch of allies, all your physicals suck. So um, it doesn't actually feel bad to use those there, but in like global theory of it anyway, it could feel bad to have to waste like a a physical attack slot on an energy attack now, or your 1 energy attack a game or whatever. So there are a couple cards that you can choose to sensei that are um, just sort of more universal hate for that. Now, Cell's Presence, we'll talk about this first. This is like the obvious the big boy in the ally hate realm. Just like the uh, 17 Smirks, this card just says take every ally, throw them all in the remove from game, as opposed to the one. This one is another just sort of like obvious staple, but having the ability to rip a table full of extra attacks from your opponent, and that's the big thing with ally decks most of the time. that their win comes from they technically have like more stages of damage to take than you. That's like a good defense. But really their big win is that 8 allies on the table means they have 8 extra powers, which means they have 8 extra actions a turn than you. And so action economy in those decks is just so much higher than yours. Even if you're a Saiyan deck or something, I got a 6 card hand, and they're like, cool, I've got 4 and 8 allies. Which one of us has more things to do this turn? I know the answer to that question. So you still have to be able to hit that kind of stuff. And Presence just ripping it all away feels great. Just like we talked about with Smirks, though, you don't have to wait for Self Presence to hit every ally they have. Now, Self Presence is slightly different. My sort of stance on that is a little bit different because there isn't really a a Z Warriors gather uh, for drills. There's like sort of releasing the sword, but there's not really the same kind of thing that the Z Warriors gather does, where that they just pop it and play 7 allies. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna wait. If you're an ally deck, you're probably playing Z Warriors gather. That's just part of the like ally package. And if I'm facing an ally deck and I draw my Cell's Presence, I'm probably going to try to wait until I can resolve it after their Z Warriors gather. That's like that is a little different than where I would say just rip the 17 smirks right away and just get the immediate value from it and move on. You don't have to clutch it. Cell's Presence I would clutch a little bit harder. But there are still plenty of times where I think that's wrong. I think that there's plenty of times where you're like, well, they don't have their 7 allies. I know there's going to be more, but they've got they've got 2 of their like 4 real good attackers. And they've got a couple searchers or like sort of more passive effect kind of guys that I know might come out. Cell's Presence is the right way to do that, to remove the Cell Junior searchers from play before they get to search for other Cell Juniors. Letting that sort of board state snowball like that, so worth it. So it's not always, ooh, hold this forever until they've resolved their Z Warriors gather and hit them all. And it's also not always don't do that. It's you really have to know which allies are strong in which deck. And that's I think that's the biggest message that I could say about this video and this concept is that there are some things that we can teach you here about like making a better Sensei deck. But but I can't, Nick can't, a million people in the world can't give you enough like Sensei lessons or whatever to overcome like discovering and learning about what your deck needs and why. And then knowing, okay, so that my deck's weakness is this bad in this spot. And against the ally decks that I'm weak against, those ally decks are strongest against me with these particular cards. Learning the reason that the ally decks uh, prosper as much off of the individual allies they get is super relevant. And if you're going to try to play a deck and you feel that ally decks are your weakness, one of the first things you should be really pushing to do is spending time learning about which of those allies is the actual problem for you, why those are piling up. And if that's once that happens, then you can be better about, using your Saiyan executions or something to hit 2 allies and knowing which are the right 2, using your ultimatum to pick better cards once your opponent makes piles. It's really important to know the individual value of cards is what I'm trying to say. I can't just tell you you need to have ally hate for the ally matchup. You need to know why each of those allies is the problem for you. And that's going to differ for each deck. So you're going to have to kind of get intimately familiar with that about your particular build, what each of those allies is tripping you up with. So, long story short, Cell's Presence, really good all the time against ally decks. Play it, have it. You should do that. Always just hold on to it to try to hit every ally, but do hold it personally, at least for me, a little longer than a gather exists. Oops, Crushing Dive. Nick, I'll let you kind of cover this half of things. This card doesn't. really represent one card. It represents like more of an idea.
Yeah, so the idea is that if your deck is bad against allies, that you need to have cards that further your strategy, but also answer allies. Generally speaking, I mentioned this earlier in the video. If you're a physical beats deck, you're going to be worse against allies than an energy beats deck is. Energy beats decks aren't going to care as much about allies. So generally speaking, if you're, I know Derek mentioned earlier that if you're saying you should just play the key ball and the explosion. I actually don't agree with that, and I don't do that personally. I'm currently playing a future Gohan stage lock deck that plays 3 Oops Crushing Dives and 3 Saiyan Surprise. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Saiyan Surprise. It is not a good card, but it does discard allies in play. So I have 2 Cell's Presence in my Sensei deck, and I'm trying to put the cards in my deck to offset the things that I'm bad against. So that's kind of where we're
Okay.
at with Oops Crushing Dive and with some of those effects. Is you need to play cards, if you're not good against allies, you need to play cards that offset the fact that you're not good against allies. So find you. I mean, I've seen people play cards like Saiyan Heads Up. Now, that's not a card I would personally play, but if you're bad against those specific kinds of cards, go find the attack in your style or in a freestyle that can answer those cards. If you're on, like, red is one of the ones for me, because red, everybody's like, oh, it's got annihilation. Well, annihilation can't answer every single card in the game. I mean, it kind of can, but like, it actually doesn't, because there's only 3 of them. So you need more. You need more help. So I like to be on Oops Crushing Dive in those decks. I chose Oops Crushing Dive as the part of this slide because I think that most physical decks that they're going to lean towards Oops Crushing Dive as that other card to help them answer allies. It's a very powerful attack. Um, Obviously, some styles have really useful cards. Orange has Orange Stare Down, which I think is an incredible card. And even if it's your only energy attack in your deck, I think it's a pretty incredible card and you should play it. But there are, like, most styles have 1 or 2, like, solid answers to allies. And if you're a pure physical beats Orange deck and you don't want to play Stare Down in your main, you can put it in your Sensei deck. You can bring it in against drills. You can bring it in against allies. You can bring it in against Dragon Ball. And then if you're on a beatdown mirror, then you don't have to have an energy attack in your deck you don't want. So again, you can kind of use the flexibility of your Sensei deck in that sense, right? The Sensei deck's goal is to cover the things you're bad against. So if you're bad against allies and you don't want to have to put Orange Stare Down in your main deck, put it in your Sensei deck. Bring it in against allies. There's your answer. So, kind of an overarching kind of way to look at this. And allies are one of the clean ones where it's like, man, you know real quick if your deck's bad against allies or not. To what Derek said about Cell's Presence, he basically summed it all up. Cell's Presence is a card that the matchups where your opponent is afraid of Cell's Presence is the best card in your deck. And anytime it's the best card, Sensei deck card can be the best card in your deck. You're going to want to have access to it a lot. So if you're playing Cell and you don't have a lot of ways to fight those Cell Juniors, yeah, you need Cell's Presence. And if you're playing against, I think Bobbity is going to be a force going forward. And if you don't have a way to answer those Majins, you're going to want Cell's Presence. If you can't answer Bojack's guys, you're going to want Cell's Presence. So I think that's kind of where we're at with this. I think that you'll mostly be able to tell based on what your deck is and what it does if Cell's Presence is a card you want. And then while you're looking at building your main deck, I want you to think about cards like Oops Crushing Dive. And, if you're going to play physical +4 has some effect on it, but you're maybe not as great against allies, probably just switch that to Oops Crushing Dive or something similar.
That takes us out of the allies section into what we call kind of catch-alls. This is less focused on like a specific deck weakness, like, and there aren't a ton of these. Really, there's only kind of these two. Um, you might make some argument for a couple other things, but this is really the two that are the standout ones. So we'll start with Deeds first. It's a little older and it's Heroes Only. So Heroes Only, full card in play to its deck. He obviously can't put their masteries or senseis or masteries in their deck, and you can't pick Dragon Balls because you can never pick Dragon Balls with card effects like this. But this card, getting to shuffle a card into play, obviously really good against the decks that cards can't be discarded or whatever. Um, we have mentioned it before that having something that just discards your opponent's cards, obviously not always good enough anymore, because there's a lot of discard manipulation now. So shuffling a card into deck has actually proven nowadays, at least, to be better more often than discarding a card. We've talked about like the difference kind of between stare down and confrontation, and how confrontation in just like a vacuum of the text on the card actually proves to be a little better nowadays than stare down does. Obviously, stare down still wins that because it's interaction with buffer block, blah 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 blah. But like if you just read the text on those two cards like straight up, confrontation actually is better, believe it or not, than a stare down in this like day and age. And deeds is an attack that also just does that. It's not as successful. So if you have specific things that you are weak against and you need like a little bit more juice to cover those bases, Deeds does a really, really good job with this. It can also hit, battlegrounds locations. So if you're an MTBV deck or something, you might have this to put away to sort of like shuffle back Winter Countrysides, and not have to like skip a combat. Having, if you're, let me rephrase this, a lot of decks will play their own three battlegrounds or locations to sort of trump an opponent's battleground or location. As like my answer to their location is to just play my own. In an MPPV deck or something like that, where you're like you just need to like foot on the gas and go. You don't have that luxury sometimes to take a combat and a half off to play a location and be like, oh, finally their winter's gone. And now I can't do anything this turn, so I pass. And oh, they played Winter again. You need to be able to like get in, enter, and do it. So having cards like Deeds available to you in those kind of decks are going to be really good because you can just throw this when you enter combat, get rid of the Winter Countryside, and then just start rushing the anger again. You can start times where this will sort of clear the way for something that would have otherwise been inhibiting your ability to further your win con. Ultimatum is a little bit wider net and a little bit less um, proactive about this because your opponent gets to kind of make the piles or whatever. But hitting up to 5 cards, I mean, really, you get to hit, 4 at the absolute most if your opponent made a pile of 4 and a pile of 1. Um, but hitting that many cards with 1 card is really good. There's no denying that, right? And I think Ultimatum will find its way into plenty of Sensei decks going forward. Card will be even space. But the point I want to make is that choosing and then you getting to put some away after they've made their pile is obviously good, and is if your deck needs to be able to clear table space up, Ultimatum is going to be good at that. And when Deeds will hit 1 card that you really want gone. Ultimatum will still hit that 1 card because if you're like, I really need to hit the Winter Countryside they have on the table. Also, I'm going to have them pick 4 other cards, and then I'll just pick whatever pile has Winter Countryside in it because that's the card I really want gone. That's like when you play Ultimatum, more often than not, you'll be playing it to hit the 1 card you wanted anyway, and then you'll get bonus value out of whatever the rest of the pile they make is. And sometimes maybe they'll make a pile that's so good the card you want gone is diminished in its desirability, I guess. But most of the time, Ultimatum's still going to trigger that same spot that Deeds would, where you're just going to say, oh, well, I know that the card I hated that was in play was Halting Drill. I need Halting Drill gone. And they're like, all right, well, I made a pile of Halting Drill and 4 other drills. You're like, that's fine. Halting Drill is what I wanted gone anyway. Get rid of that. Keep your other 4 drills. That sucks, but I wanted it gone. That's why I played this card. So these 2 cards will let you hit kind of anything. They'll work for all 4 of these weaknesses we talked about. They'll work for even the less for the beatdown stuff, but even still that, because some of the beatdown decks now rely on like stays in play to be used as second time cards, and getting to shuffle those in before they hit you again is even still something you can do with this. So these will literally catch just about all of the things a deck could be weak against. So I think both of these cards demand attention when considering your Sensei deck, if not even main deck.
Yeah, so Deeds is an interesting card because like what its value is just the answer that it provides to everything. So I think a lot of hero decks, especially hybrid and or energy decks, are going to play Deeds in the main and feel perfectly fine about that. Another thing that Deeds is a very good Hercules Amazing Technique target. Um, Most of the decks that should be playing Hat are going to be full ball decks and stuff like that, and this being able to shuffle away a City in Turmoil, very very strong. Bulma's
Mm.
Ultimatum is generally speaking going to be stronger than Deeds, but in return you don't get an attack, and like that could seem kind of not that super relevant a lot of times. But energy for 4 is not nothing, and having the attack attached to it is a very valuable part of the card. So I like Bulma's Ultimatum a lot in the decks where you're going to get to hit multiple cards, right? So to hit multiple cards, you're probably going to want to have 4-ish targets on average to get 2 cards out of this. If you have, 3 targets, you're probably going to take. They're probably going to, this is the one you want. These are the 2 that you care less about. You're going to take the one, and then at that point, a combat that's just the secondary from Deeds. That's not exactly the strongest card in the world, But if you can hit 2 or plus cards with this, that's when it'll really ramp up in power. But thankfully, a lot of the decks that this is good against will give you an infinite amount of targets to hit. So, if you're playing against Orange Drill or you're playing against a Dragon Ball deck or something like that, they're going to have 8, 10, 12 cards in play. You're playing against an ally deck, this card answers allies just the same. If you're playing against anything like that, they're going to give you a lot of targets. And those decks, this card is going to be amazing. But, if your opponent's a deck that's not going to play to the board a ton, you definitely would prefer Deeds in those matchups. I don't want people to put Bulma's Ultimatum in their Sensei and then just bring it in all the time because it has a time and a place just like everything else, right? Like I have screamed from the rooftops, put Frieza's Deception in your Sensei deck every time. That doesn't mean you bring it in every time. If you're playing against Boo, you're probably not bringing in Frieza's Deception most of the time. And it's the same thing with Ultimatum. You have to understand when cards are good. When this card is good, it's amazing. When this card is not good, it's probably not worth being in your deck. So knowing how and when to sensei is a lot of the value here. But the card's incredibly strong.
You're invited. Nick, you are the king of takes on You're Invited. So I'm gonna let you
Okay, let's talk about You're Invited. So You're Invited is a card that
teach
generally.
us
Oh,
teach us the way.
You're Invited is a card that generally people put in every single deck they build. That is inherently wrong. And here's first of all, let's talk about what it actually does and why it's useful. So the 2 big uses for me for You're Invited are listed on each side of it. I want to talk about the Energy Lob use first. Energy Lob is a card that is limit 1 because it's absurdly strong. Energy Attack, discard a non-combat, search for a non-combat, place it into play. All right, people don't go out of their way to discard your You're Invited because You're Invited most of the time is not that impactful. So you're going to get to keep your You're Invited in play until you can play your Energy Lob. Now, how do you play your Energy Lob? Normally it's Hercules Amazing Technique. Sometimes it's an Namekian deck that has a lot of ways to search for energy combat, something like that. But this Energy Lob is going to allow you to get rid of your Invited to go get some variation of non-combat that's super strong. Let the Games Begin as a choice. Z Warriors Gather is an obvious choice. Maybe a Goku's Capturing Drill or something for a ball deck. There's a lot of different variations you can go with Lob. And if you're playing Energy Lob in your deck, you're probably going to want to play your Invited. The other example for playing your Invited is Saiyan Beef. And I'm using Saiyan Beef more because it is the best of these cards. But basically, if your deck is super, super aggressive, your Invited can have some value in those decks. If you're entering combat most of the time and you're willing to throw away a card, especially if you have a Mastery or an MP that draws, so that you don't feel as bad losing the card from your hand to actually invite somebody, you can get a lot of value out of just being aggressive and aggressively inviting your opponent into combat. I chose Saiyan Beef as the example for this card because to me, if you're playing 3 Saiyan Beefs, you should absolutely have your Invited in your deck. What the obvious goal is to enter on them, beef them, and then invite them the next combat, and then enter on them again. So you get 3 combats worth of beef out of 1 beef card. That's what you're looking for. That's when your Invited is at its highest point. I think that people play this card wrong more than any other card in this game by a good margin, and that's because they don't really understand when the You're Invited has value and when it doesn't. Um, If you are an aggressive deck, you need to actively be inviting your opponent in the times where it makes sense to invite your opponent. And if you're a deck that's not aggressive enough to invite your opponent and you're not playing Energy Lob, just don't play your invited. We've talked all this whole video has been about all these great Sensei deck cards and how strong they are and how they can just win you games. Why are you wasting a Sensei deck slot on a card that 85 to 90% of the time does nothing? This card is blank in 90% of decks, but people always play it. It is incredibly wrong to put this in your deck unless you have a real strategy for what you're doing with it. And the real strategy is on each side of this card. It's very aggressive beatdown decks, and it is decks that are using Energy Lob. That's it. That's the whole thing, right? Like, yeah, you can give me some spiel about, well, I'm trying to play Tap Car. I would argue Tap Car's pretty aggressive deck. Yeah, and obviously getting them to invited is pretty strong. So even in the decks where it's like I can come up with some random nonsense reason why I should play your invited, you probably shouldn't. And if you should, it's because you're playing one of these kind of strategies. It's because you're on a beatdown strategy where you draw some cards and you can make up losing the card to force your ball deck opponent to enter on you, or it's you're playing Energy Lob. Generally speaking, as long as you are wasting a Sensei deck spot on your invited, you're just giving up a card that's way more powerful in certain matchups. And so that is my take on your invited. That is my take on why people should not be playing your invited nearly as often. You should have a reason for every card you put in your deck. Don't We talked in the first video about Victorial and about people putting Victorial in every single deck when it should really only see play in about 80% of decks. Your invited is exactly the same way, except it's the opposite. Your invited should see play in about 20% of decks, and it sees play in 90. And that's absurd. It's people not understanding what a card actually does and why a card actually matters. This card in most decks does not matter. Stop playing it.
So, you're saying that having a card in your Sensei deck that most of the time doesn't do anything and wastes an otherwise perfectly good slot for actual important tech is probably not that good. Is that what you're trying to say?
That is my take. Yes.
Well, what about this?
Okay, so let's talk about Hercule's Amazing Techniques. Most people that have heard me talk about this card know that my take on this is completely the opposite of basically everyone in the league. I think this card is, I don't want to say terrible, but it's bad. And the reason it's bad is I mean, it's actually tenfold why it's bad. So the first thing about what this card does is it forces you to build your Sensei deck in a way that you give up all of the tech from playing Sensei decks. Right? If you're playing Hercule's Amazing Technique, or Hat as we're going to refer to it going forward, in your deck, then your Sensei deck must be a series of one of silver bullet type cards that you can target with Hat. Now, can you build some kind of hybrid Sensei where you play 4 tech cards and 5 one ofs? Yeah, you can. I don't know why you would do that, but I don't know why you would play this card most of the time anyway. So I want to first start with these are the reasons to play the card, right? If you are on an 85 card ball deck and you're not on Piccolo Sensei, you're probably playing something like Westkai or something like that. You can't Sensei because you're on a ball deck, right? That is the deck that this card makes sense for. Okay, so I can't Sensei, so I'm going to play my Westkai Sensei, and I'm going to play You're Invited probably, and then I'm going to play Energy Lob, and then I'm going to play 5 targets for my Hercule's Amazing Techniques. What are those targets? My personal favorite in those builds is Goku's Blinding Strike. Cards that can answer your opponent's Sensei cards, because your opponent, if they're playing correctly, are going to be bringing in cards that actually answer what your deck does, instead of just playing nonsense combat cards that we'll get into all the reasons why this card's bad shortly. But those are the decks you want this card in, right? 85 card ball decks where you can't Sensei, this makes sense. If you're on South Kai, I think it's reasonable to play this in South Kai Sensei because you're already putting yourself in a hole where you can't do a lot of senseiing. So having access to this as a way to get, a little bit of value, it could be okay there. I generally don't do it, and I would not play this in most South Kai Sensei decks. But like, I'm not gonna bitch at you for doing that because I think it's pretty reasonable. The other thing is if you're doing some kind of combo-y broken stuff, right? Like, yeah, you can make your argument that, well, I'm playing, the Hercule that, counts his freestyle, his name cards as Goku name cards, and I'm going to hat for Z Warriors Gather on turn 1 every game. Cool. All right, cool. You got some wonky tier 7 strategy that you want to use and this makes sense for it, do that then. That's great. But we're talking about in generic deck building. I would argue that probably if you pulled the last 26 people who played in an event, they probably play Hercule's Amazing Technique in 80 to 90% of their decks. It's wrong. It's inherently wrong. This card is not good. All right, here's all the reasons why this card sucks. This card is completely dead against Majin Buu's Fury, which is in a good chunk of decks. This card is negatable and spherable, which is in every single deck. This card, at its even if it's not broken or even if it's not stopped by something, a lot of times it just gets you a generic attack. Like you could just play the generic attack, and then it's not dead in all the other scenarios, right? And then you still have your Sensei deck access. So not only does this card cut off your access to cards like Kami Fades and and Cells Threatening that win you the game, it cuts off access to cards that just win you the game. It's also dead against a lot of variants of cards that see a ton of play, Fury and anything like that cuts off your ability to play generic random combat stuff. Settle down, the spheres and negations. You're giving your opponent free targets for stuff. If you want to play this card, especially if you're playing something, I've seen people play Hat and then use it to get a key ball to discard a couple allies. Okay, so if you're doing that, you're playing a combat card that you have to hope isn't negated or hope isn't sphered and hope your opponent hasn't furied to go get a key ball out of your Sensei deck, and then you're hoping your opponent's not on red, because if they're on red, they might have knocked your key ball out of your Sensei deck already, or something like that. And and then you can throw out your key ball that you could have just had in your main deck and probably drew at some point. So to me, there's no reason to play this card. The cost of this card is incredibly high by giving up all of the powerful tech cards, and the value you get from it is almost nothing. This card 90% of the time, if it doesn't get Energy Lob and it's not doing the Energy Lob thing, it just gets a generic attack you could just have in your main deck anyway. So, the fact that this card sees play in 80 to 90% of a decks is ridiculous. People absolutely overrate what this card can do. Most of the time, it's a generic attack that is harder to play and is open to negate when you're negations and spheres when your other cards wouldn't be. Derek, you got any takes?
Well, no, I think you really nailed it, and as you can tell by the thumbnail and title of this video, part of this video existed to because Nick especially, but myself included, wanted to bring up the this card is not that good. This card for 20 years has been touted as like the the GOAT card, it used to be a 3 of, now it's a 2 of because it was so good or whatever. And like it really just isn't. There's sometimes where it's fine, like there are decks where it will have obviously good use. It's not that it's this card is not the kind of bad that is like this is unplayable. You can't put this in anything and ever have it matter. Because like adding a lob for a reasonable grab is a very strong play. Adding like stuff like that those are those are really relevant, right? That will progress your win very well. So decks like that are going to be fine. There are other decks that are like super niche and weird. My Turles deck, for example, is one where like I can't really afford to Sensei because I need my Crusher Core in my deck. And I guess I technically could put my Crusher Core in my Sensei deck and Sensei it in, but I'm playing South Kai and I only get 5 anyway. So then I don't have enough cards to like really even justify the rest of a Sensei deck having tech in it. And my deck isn't I don't want to play enough turns to need tech. Like it's supposed to kill you. We're supposed to enter combat after I do the tree thing, and then you're supposed to die. And if you don't, then like I'm probably losing. So I don't have time to need to sensei like my Frieza's deceptions in or like I shouldn't need the game shouldn't be long enough for that to be a card I would need to have. So like hat kind of makes sense there because then I can have a little 5 card sensei deck of like bombs or something. And those are like that's relevant in the times where it would in decks like that have no other reason to sensei, are playing South Kai and don't have any other like real value use to their Sensei deck, but a lot of decks that'll have a Southkai still have plenty of things they can put in that 5 cards that are just better than grabbing an attack with hat, whatever it be. So even those, most of the time, it's still not worth it. The long story short, this card, wildly overplayed, wasting your Sensei deck space on like generic attack A that could just be in your deck 3 of anyway. Having hat be your 4th and 5th copy or whatever of your other generic attack. Who gives a shit? It's not worth taking. It's not worth having 2 extra whatever generic attack waste waste 2 cells one each or whatever. Grab those off of targetable hat technique cards. It's just we just talked about it a bunch on the last slide. If you're invited is bad, well, if you're invited is bad in the spot where it's bad because it is a wasted slot. It's not using your Sensei deck to help you not lose the game. Then hat filling your Sensei deck with cards that don't help you not lose the game is even worse. And if there's already argument for stop playing your invited in so many decks, Hercule's Amazing Techniques now saying, let's waste more of that deck. We're going to scream that from an even higher rooftop that that's not a thing you should probably be doing in most decks. So, and it's been said on most of these slides, as you build your deck and take some of these like strategies to heart or whatever, your Sensei deck, um, the way you utilize your Sensei deck should start to improve. There are ways to make your Sensei deck work for you and not just be like 13 extra random cards that you brought along with your main deck.
that you can
That's
hat
not what your
for.
Sensei deck should be. What?
That you can hat for, right? So I do want to add one more thing about hat while we're on the topic. So again, the important part of here is that the cost is hidden, right? Like that's what
Yeah,
I think that newer players and just for lack of a better explanation, bad players don't understand is that the cost of this card is not something that's face up. The cost of this card is that you're not going to beat the Dragon Ball deck now. You're not going to beat the MPPV deck if your deck's not already ready to beat that deck. Like you are giving up your ability to beat the generic specific strategies by playing this card. And the value you get from it is basically nothing. You are giving up your flexibility and ability to improve your bad matchups in exchange for a 4th Saiyan key ball or something. Whatever. You know, there's just there's a time and a place for this card, just like everything else, right? Like I'm not saying never put this card in your deck. I'm saying there are specific decks that play this, and if you have to ask, yours isn't one of them.
there it is. Message.
So, uh, again, please stop playing this card so much. Learn how to Sensei. If you know how to Sensei deck, you know that you don't play this card that much. This card is very specific and very niche, just like everything else. It goes in specific decks, and if you're playing this in your generic Saiyan decks, if you're playing this in your generic black decks, it's because you don't know how to Sensei. That's the answer. I mean, and I hate to pick on people in the league because I like most of you guys, but if you actually want to get better, and that's what we're here for, and you actually care about that, if you're playing Orange and BS and you have Hat and you don't have Blackwater Confusion Drill, and then you're wondering how you can't beat the ball deck, that's why you can't beat the ball deck, dude. If you're playing generic Saiyan Beatdown and you're playing Hat and you're wondering why you're losing to, MPPV or something like that, that's why you're losing to MPPV because you don't know how to sensei. Learn how to sensei, and the first step is stop playing Hercule's Amazing Techniques.
That's it, folks. There it is. Message of the day. End of episode 2. Perfect score. The perfect score for today. Let's stop playing so much hat.